She did not know the man on the bridge could see her. That was the first thing that mattered. The river moved slow that morning, gray with the last of the night, and Eleanor Hale knelt at its edge, with her sleeves pushed to her elbows. Her hands ached from the cold water. She did not stop. Above her, hidden behind a curtain of willow branches, a rider had gone still. He had not meant to stop. He told himself that later, more than once. He had ridden out before sunrise, only to escape a house full of people who wanted something from him. And he had not expected to find a reason to stay. But there she was, a woman working at the water's edge, her hair coming loose, her shoulders set in a way that spoke of habit rather than complaint. She did not look up. She did not know she was being watched at all. And that, more than anything, was what held him there. If you like slow-burn stories where nothing is ever quite what it seems, stay close. This one has a few turns coming. Eleanor lifted her face to the light breaking over the fields. She closed her eyes for one breath. Just one. Long enough to feel the sun without anyone telling her she didn't deserve it. She had learned over 19 years that dawn was the only hour no one watched her. She was wrong. She simply did not know it yet. The man above the bridge turned his horse before she could see him. He told himself it meant nothing. A gentleman did not linger over a woman doing washing at a riverbank. He rode back toward the village with the reins loose in his hands, and her face already fixed somewhere behind his eyes, in a place he could not shake it loose from. He did not know her name. He did not know that the plain dress she wore had been her cousin's 3 winters before. He did not know that the house she walked back to had once belonged to her own father, before it became, in every way that counted, someone else's. He only knew he had not wanted to look away, and that not wanting it frightened him more than he let himself admit. Eleanor finished her work as the sun cleared the hedgerows. She wrung the linen into her basket and started the long walk home, savoring the last quiet minutes before the day's demands began. The kitchen door at Hartwell House opened onto the smell of baking bread and the sound of a woman already annoyed before 8 in the morning. "Your aunt wants you," said Mrs. Dunmore, the housekeeper, not looking up from her kneading. Then, softer, just for Eleanor. "She's in one of her moods again." Eleanor nodded. She did not sigh. Sighing only ever cost her more than it was worth. She climbed the back stairs. The front ones were not for her. Her aunt had decided that 3 years ago, when she declared that Eleanor's presence in the main rooms unsettled the household's dignity. She found Mrs. Prudence Faircliff at her writing desk, sealing a letter, wearing the particular expression she kept for moments she wanted credit for restraint. "There you are," her aunt said. "I trust the washing is done." "Yes, aunt." "Good. Georgiana's blue silk wants the hem let down before Thursday. Mind you do it properly this time." Eleanor said nothing. There was nothing she could say that would not be turned somehow into evidence of her ingratitude. "You have your mother's hands," her aunt added, almost idle, sealing the wax. "Restless, never content to sit still and be looked at the way a lady ought." It was not the first time her aunt had spoken of her mother in that tone, soft, almost fond, entirely without warmth. Eleanor had grown up on pieces of a story no one would tell her whole. That her mother had been beautiful, that she had been foolish, that she had brought some shame on the family that no one would name outright, and that she had died when Eleanor was 6, leaving behind a daughter who was, in her aunt's eyes, a living reminder of it. Eleanor had stopped asking questions about her mother years ago. The answers only ever came dressed as insults. She carried the blue silk to the small room at the top of the house that had become hers, because no one else wanted it. Cold in winter, close and airless in summer. She worked through the morning with even, careful stitches. If her mind drifted once or twice to the strange feeling she'd had at the river, of being watched by something that wasn't the willow trees, she told herself it was nothing. Fancy. The kind of thing tired girls imagined. She was wrong about that, too. Georgiana found her at midday, sweeping in with rosewater, and good news she couldn't wait to share. "There's a new gentleman coming to the assembly Thursday," she said, eyes bright. "A friend of the Whitfields, staying at the inn in the village. No one knows quite who he is, but Mrs. Whitfield says he carries himself like a man of consequence." "I'm glad for you," Eleanor said, biting off a thread. "You never seem excited about anything." Georgiana tilted her head, studying her cousin the way one studies a creature whose habits don't quite make sense. "Don't you ever want something more than this?" She gestured at the narrow window, the mended gowns, the small, cold room. Eleanor looked up. For one unguarded second, something honest moved behind her eyes. "Wanting has never done me much good, Georgiana. I've found it easier not to." Her cousin had no answer for that. She left humming, already dreaming of Thursday. Eleanor finished the hem alone. If a tear slipped free before she caught it, she told herself it was only the strain of close needlework. Nothing more. The gentleman staying at the village inn was, of course, no ordinary gentleman. He was Julian Ashbourne, Duke of Rothmere, traveling under a borrowed name for reasons that had made perfect sense to him a week ago, and now felt harder to explain, even to himself. His steward had written of trouble on one of his smaller estates, tenants poorly treated, an agent grown too comfortable in his post. Julian had decided, in a restlessness he did not examine too closely, to see the matter with his own eyes, rather than trust another letter full of easy reassurances. But there was more to it than land, if he was honest with himself. He was 35, unmarried, tired down to the bone of being seen as a title before he was ever seen as a man. A decade of mothers parading daughters before him like prize horses at a fair, each one coached to laugh at his jokes and admire his boots. He had begun to wonder if there was a single woman in England who would speak to him plainly, without first weighing what the honesty might cost her. He had come here, in part, to find out. He had not expected to find her washing linen at a riverbank at dawn, entirely unaware she was being watched, carrying a kind of stillness no title could buy, and no fortune could teach. He told himself it was only curiosity that made him ask quietly about the household near the old stone bridge. He learned it belonged to a widow with 2 young women in her charge, her own daughter, and a niece, the orphaned daughter of her late husband's brother, set to the roughest work in the house, though no one seemed quite willing to say why. Julian filed the thought away and told himself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. Her face followed him back to his rooms at the inn that night, and refused, however he tried, to leave him in peace. Julian met her properly 3 days later, and it happened, as such things do, entirely by accident. He had ridden out to check a boundary fence at the edge of Hartwell land, dressed plainly, his horse an unremarkable bay rather than the fine gray he rode at home. He came upon her gathering herbs along the hedgerow, a basket over her arm, her bonnet slipping back from hair. The sun had turned the color of dark honey at the edges. She startled at the sound of hooves, straightened, studied him with the quick, careful look of someone used to sizing up strangers for her own safety. "Good morning," Julian said, swinging down from the saddle. It seemed wrong, somehow, to speak to her from horseback. "I wonder if you might tell me whether I've strayed onto Hartwell land. I confess I've lost my bearings rather badly." "You have," she said. "This hedgerow marks the line. Rothmere land lies beyond it, though I understand the Duke himself is rarely troubled to know where his own boundaries run." There was the faintest dryness in her voice, not quite a joke, not quite a complaint, Julian felt an unexpected flicker of amusement, followed close behind by something less comfortable. The recognition that this was exactly the kind of honesty he'd come here hoping to find, without ever quite admitting it to himself. "You're not fond of the Duke, then?" "I've never met him," she said. "I've only heard him discussed, which is a different thing, and rather less flattering. The barn roof on the Cobb farm leaks like a sieve, and no one from the estate has troubled to look at it in 3 years." She caught herself coloring slightly. "Forgive me. I don't know why I should burden a stranger with our local grievances." "Not at all," Julian said, and meant it more than she could know. "I find local grievances a good deal more interesting than most drawing-room conversation." She looked at him properly then, as if reassessing him. Something in her expression loosened, just slightly. Not warmth. Not yet. But the look of someone deciding he was, at least, not a fool. "I don't believe I caught your name." "Ashworth," he said, and the lie came easier than he liked. "I'm looking into some matters of business for a friend with land in the district." "Eleanor Hale," she said, and did not curtsy, did not defer, did none of the small performances he'd come to expect from young women learning a gentleman's name, because she had no reason to think his name meant anything at all. It was, he thought, possibly the most honest introduction he'd received in 10 years. They talked for a quarter of an hour about nothing much. The weather, the roads, a quarrel between 2 farmers over a stray goat, which she told with a dry humor that made him laugh out loud, a sound that surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. When he rode back toward the village, his mind was a good deal more occupied than it had been that morning. He would not correct her mistake. Not yet. He told himself it was only prudence, that a woman who believed him a man of modest means would speak to him as she truly was, and that the small deception was worth what it bought him. He did not look too closely at the other possibility, that he simply wanted, once in his life, to be liked for himself, and feared what he'd learn if he tested the wish too soon. It was, he would later admit, the first real mistake of many. Over the following fortnight, Mr. Ashworth found a great many reasons to be near Hartwell House. He arranged, through a local builder, for the leaking barn roof to be mended. He gave no name and took no credit. He learned in careful, unhurried conversation that Eleanor had once loved to read, but rarely had the leisure now. That she had a gift for herbal remedies, taught her by an old woman in the village before she died. That she never spoke of her mother, and that her face closed like a shutter whenever the subject came near. He learned that she laughed rarely, but when she did, the weariness dropped away all at once, and something quick and warm and startlingly alive stood in its place. He began to look forward to these small, stolen meetings, more than he looked forward to anything else in his careful, guarded life. Eleanor, for her part, told herself Mr. Ashworth was merely a pleasant acquaintance. She told herself this even as she began walking the hedgerow path more often than her herb gathering required, and taking a little more care with her hair on the mornings she thought she might see him. She told herself a great many things that were not entirely true. The first crack in her defenses came on an afternoon she'd gone to the river later than usual, held back by one of her aunt's endless small demands. She was alone at the water's edge when Tobias Merrick, the blacksmith's son, came upon her and stood too close, his meaning plain in the set of his shoulders. "No need to play the fine lady with me, Miss Hale," he said. "Everyone knows what your mother was. No one's like to think worse of you for taking after her a little." Eleanor went very still. The basket of linen dropped, forgotten, into the mud. She stepped back. He stepped forward. It was then that Julian arrived. He crossed the ground between them faster than he'd moved in years, and the look he turned on Tobias Merrick was not the look of a man of modest means at all. Tobias released her wrist and backed away, muttering something that satisfied no one. "If I find you troubling this lady again," Julian said quietly, "you will regret it considerably more than you regret it now." Tobias fled. Eleanor stood shaking, not only from fear, but from the strange, unfamiliar weight of having been defended. "Are you hurt?" Julian asked, his voice gentled entirely. "No," she said, unsteady. "No, only, thank you. I don't. No one has ever." She stopped, mortified by the tears rising without her permission. "You need not thank me," he said. "No one should have to bear what you've borne. I'm only sorry I wasn't here sooner." She looked up at him then, searching his face for pity, or the calculating look men sometimes wore toward women they thought already ruined. She found neither, only a quiet, steady concern that asked nothing of her in return. It undid her more thoroughly than kindness ever had. "What did he mean?" she asked before she could stop herself. "About my mother?" Julian hesitated. "I don't know the particulars," he said honestly. "Only that whatever happened, it was your mother's choice to make. No shame of hers, if shame there was, belongs to you." She carried those words with her for days after, turning them over like a stone worn smooth by handling. She did not yet understand that she was falling in love. She only understood that, for the first time in years, she felt seen, and that the feeling frightened her nearly as much as it comforted her, because she had learned long ago that things seen too clearly were things that could be taken away. The assembly at Millbrook arrived faster than anyone expected. 2 evenings before, Mrs. Dunmore found Eleanor mending a ribbon alone in the sewing room. "It isn't right," the housekeeper said. "You're a gentleman's daughter, same as your cousin, whatever your aunt likes to pretend. There's no reason on this earth you shouldn't go to Millbrook, same as she does. I've a length of gray silk put away 3 years now. Let me help you cut it before Thursday." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, but something new had taken root in her since that afternoon at the river. Some quiet insistence that perhaps she deserved, once, to be seen as more than a pair of useful hands. She agreed before she'd fully decided to. Her aunt received the news the next morning with such open displeasure that Georgiana, watching from the breakfast table, laughed before she could stop herself. "I hardly think it wise," Aunt Prudence said. "You've no notion how to conduct yourself in company, Eleanor. I should hate for you to be embarrassed." "I shall try not to embarrass anyone, Aunt," Eleanor said, with a steadiness that surprised even her. Her aunt's eyes narrowed, calculating something Eleanor couldn't read. "Very well, but you'll wear something suitable, and you'll not put yourself forward. I won't have you drawing attention from your cousin." Eleanor said nothing. She had never in her life put herself forward for anything. When Thursday came, she used the front stairs, deliberately, her heart hammering at the small defiance. Dressed in silver-gray silk that caught the candlelight, she looked, Mrs. Dunmore said with tears in her eyes, exactly like her mother on the night she'd first been presented, 20 years before. Georgiana stared at her cousin with open surprise. "Why, Eleanor, you look quite lovely." It was not unkindly meant, but it carried a sting all its own. The assumption, unspoken but unmistakable, that loveliness was not a quality anyone had thought to expect from her. Eleanor said only, "Thank you, Georgiana. Shall we go?" The assembly rooms were already bright and crowded when they arrived. Eleanor took her place near the wall, watching Georgiana swept at once into a circle of admirers. She did not expect to be noticed. She had trained herself for years not to expect it. And then, across the room, she saw him. Their eyes met through the crowd, and something in his face, some unguarded warmth, quickly and deliberately schooled into politeness, told her he had been looking for her before he ever found her. He crossed the room. He asked her to dance. And Eleanor, who had told herself for 3 years she did not care for dancing, discovered she had been wrong about that, too. Watching from near the refreshment table, Mrs. Whitfield leaned close to Aunt Prudence's ear, her voice pitched low with the particular thrill of gossip about to be confirmed. "My dear Mrs. Fairclough, I do believe our Mr. Ashworth is very much more than he appears, Mrs." Whitfield's cousin in London had written back with a name that changed everything. "A gentleman answering precisely his description has been seen at Rothmere these past weeks," she murmured. "The Duke himself is known to travel sometimes under a false name, when he wishes to go unrecognized." Aunt Prudence went very still, her gaze fixed on Eleanor and Julian across the floor, and something sharp and calculating moved behind her eyes. By the time supper was announced, she had already begun reshaping every plan she'd made around a single glittering thought. The Duke of Rothmere stood in this very room, and her own daughter might yet be placed in his path before the truth spread further. She did not consider, even once, that he had already chosen, and that it was not her daughter. The rest of the evening passed for Eleanor in a kind of happiness she barely recognized. She danced twice more with Mr. Ashworth. She spoke with him over supper of books and quiet country mornings. She laughed without catching herself. She did not notice her aunt's gaze following her with new, unwelcome interest. She did not notice Georgiana watching the warmth between them with an expression that had not yet turned unkind, but was beginning to curdle at the edges. It was Aunt Prudence who cornered her near the cloakroom as the evening closed, her grip firm enough to bruise. "What do you know of that man?" "Only that his name is Ashworth, and that he has business in the district." Her aunt's mouth thinned into something like a smile. "I have very good reason to believe that man is the Duke of Rothmere, traveling incognito. And I will tell you plainly, since I doubt you've the wit to have guessed it yourself, a duke does not marry where he flirts, Eleanor. He flirts precisely because he need not marry there at all." The words found every old wound and pressed. Eleanor said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not confirm the very thing she was being accused of. But something colder than her aunt's cruelty had settled beneath her ribs. The fear that her aunt might be right. She barely slept that night. By morning she had resolved to guard herself completely, and to see him no more if she could manage it. She did not yet know that within 3 days, gossip would settle the matter beyond doubt, in a way that made guarding her heart a good deal harder than she supposed. The confirmation came through a careless footman's tongue at the village inn. Within hours, the news had traveled the length of the district and reached Hartwell House with the particular speed reserved for gossip, too delicious to sit quietly. Aunt Prudence received it like a woman handed a winning hand. An invitation would surely follow, some gesture toward the families who had entertained the Duke unknowingly, and she meant to see Georgiana placed to receive every advantage of it. The invitation came 3 days later, a ball at Rothmere Hall the following week. "You will attend, of course," her aunt told Eleanor, in a tone that made plain this was strategy, not kindness. "It would look strange were you not to, given how publicly you danced with him. But you'll wear the gray silk again, nothing new, and you'll keep to the edges of the room. I trust you understand me." Eleanor understood her perfectly. She was to be present, but invisible. A familiar face to prevent gossip while her cousin was arranged, gown and jewels and practiced smiles, to catch the Duke's eye and hold it. She did not protest, but something in her had shifted since Millbrook, and she resolved, privately, that whatever happened at Rothmere Hall, she would not spend the evening pretending to be smaller than she was. Julian rode to Hartwell the very next morning, hoping to tell her the truth himself before gossip could beat him to it. He found her at the river, not alone. Georgiana was with her, gathering watercress, and the presence of a third party made the private conversation he'd planned impossible. "Your Grace," Georgiana said, dropping into a curtsy so sudden she nearly overbalanced into the mud. Eleanor went very still. Her eyes met his, and what he saw there was not delight. It was a kind of wounded confirmation, as though some small hope she'd been nursing had just been put out by the plain fact of the title her cousin had spoken aloud. "Miss Hale," he said quietly, ignoring Georgiana's continued curtsying. "I had hoped to tell you myself, before this reached you secondhand." "There is nothing to discuss, Your Grace," Eleanor said, her voice gone cool in a way he'd never heard from her. "I quite understand. A gentleman of your consequence must have found our district's ignorance rather amusing." "It was never amusement. You'll forgive me if I don't linger," she said, cutting him off. "My aunt is expecting the watercress." She dropped a curtsy far shallower than her cousin's and walked back toward the house without another word. Julian stood at the riverbank with the strange, unfamiliar sense of having lost something before he'd ever properly claimed it. The days before the ball passed for Eleanor in a fog she was careful to hide from everyone but Mrs. Dunmore, who watched her with growing concern and said little, understanding that some wounds were better tended in silence. The night of the ball arrived cold and clear, every window of Rothmere Hall blazing with candlelight. Eleanor kept to the edges of the room as instructed, watching Georgiana claimed for the first dance. It was during the second that things began to unravel, though not in any way her aunt could have planned for. Mrs. Winterbourne, an elderly widow with a memory for old scandal sharper than her hearing, had planted herself near the refreshment table and was holding forth to a circle of listeners. "That's the Faircliff girl," she was saying, nodding at Georgiana. "And there's a cousin about as well. The daughter of the brother who married so disastrously, ran off with a penniless painter against the family's wishes. Died in wretched circumstances not 5 years later, and the family never did forgive the shame of it. Hard thing myself to visit the sins of the mother on the child. But there it is." Eleanor, standing close enough to hear every word, felt her face burn. This was the whole of it then. Not vice, not disgrace, only love chosen against a family's wishes, and a life cut short by hardship rather than sin. She might have slipped away, had Mrs. Winterbourne's sharp old eyes not found her at that exact moment. Why, there she is now. "Come here, child. Let me look at you properly. You've your mother's eyes. God rest her." Every eye in the circle turned to examine her. The gray silk, several years out of fashion, the flush she couldn't suppress. She understood, in that instant, exactly what her aunt had intended by sending her here unadorned. She was meant to be seen exactly like this, reduced, a living illustration of old shame, so Georgiana's polish would shine brighter beside it. It was at this precise moment that Julian, crossing the ballroom, caught sight of the small cluster gathered around her and understood from the set of her shoulders that something had gone wrong. He crossed the room without hesitation. The crowd parted before him. "Mrs. Winterbourne," he said, courtesy edged with steel, "I could not help but overhear you discussing Miss Hale's family. I wonder if you're aware her mother's story is one I've taken a particular interest in of late. A woman of considerable courage who chose love over convenience at real cost to herself, and whose daughter has borne an unjust burden for it far too long." The old woman blinked, entirely unprepared. "I meant no harm, Your Grace. I'm certain you didn't. And I trust, now that the matter's been properly aired, it need not be raised again." He turned to Eleanor and offered his arm. "Miss Hale, I believe the next dance is about to begin. Would you do me the honor?" The whole room watched as Eleanor, flushed and uncertain, placed her hand on his arm and let him lead her onto the floor. Across the room, Aunt Prudence moved to intervene. But the music had already begun, and there was nothing left to do but watch, as the Duke of Rothmere danced not with the polished, celebrated Georgiana Faircliff, but with the plain, overlooked niece the family had spent years teaching everyone to disregard.